Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to another meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee on Monday, 25th of September. I'm Richard Biggs. I'll be chairing the meeting, and I'm a council member for the Poundbury ward. Susan Cocking on my left, and we're ably assisted by Susan Dowson and John Mars as committee officers in front of us. Relatively short agenda, but there's a few meaty items in there, I'm sure you agree, for us to discuss. So first item on the agenda is apologies. Do we have any apologies for absence, please?
There are no apologies for absences. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And the second item on the agenda is the minutes from the 17th of July meeting. I hope you've all had an opportunity to read those. There's no items for action to report on that I'm aware of. Are you happy for me to sign those after the meeting? Yep, not seeing any objections to the contrary. So item 3 is declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest, please? Not seeing any hands up. And that takes me swiftly on to item 4, which is public participation. I never say that word. Do we have any comments from anyone, that questions, etc.? Nope. No, we don't.
No public participation or questions. Thank you.
Maybe we will. Maybe that's something that we'll encourage, because I think that's something that it's an opportunity perhaps for town council sometimes to add questions, particularly. Okay. Item 5, minutes of the Audit and Governance Subcommittee. Do we have any minutes? Have there been any meetings, please?
No minutes for the meetings. Thank you.
I'm sure we will have soon. Sometimes we have a whole host of busy items, but that means that it's going through the process, and the meetings will be held shortly. So item 6, which has been quite an exciting, really. Our co-opted members, and Mark Ayre is going to give the report. It's pretty self-explanatory, but I think it's a process that's welcome. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm Mark Ayre. I'm the Service Manager for Assurance. So not really too much to introduce on this paper, Chair, but the paper notes that the interview panel on behalf of this committee have offered co-opted member positions to Simon Roach and Roger Wrong. They're both joining us today in a visitor capacity. The paper seeks a recommendation from this committee to full council for them to endorse the appointments as required within the Constitution. Thank you, Chair.
So I think this is a really good process. We brought this in. I think it will add some real value to the committee. They were excellent candidates, Simon and Roger. So I'm very happy to endorse those. Councillor Twite.
Thank you, Chairman. I also am delighted to endorse this, but I see on the agenda that the 2 new co-opted members are described as independent co-opted members. And this is confusing, because there are some of the members of this council who describe themselves politically as independent. Wouldn't it be more appropriate to describe them as non-aligned or something like that, rather than independent co-opted members? Question mark.
I will seek advice from Jonathan. I think I know the answer to that, but Mr. Mayor.
Chairman, I believe that's a fair point. I wouldn't say non-aligned either, because we do have councillors who are not a member of any political group, whether it's independent or whatever. So I would simply refer to co-opted members and leave it at that.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Troy?
Yes, I'm perfectly happy to take the advice of our legal colleague.
Thank you very much. And obviously, this has to go to full council, and then there'll be full members being able to take part in the conversation and debate at our next meeting. Could I see a show of support for that and the level of remuneration as well? Okay, that is unanimous, I think. Yes, thank you very much. Okay, welcome. I'm sure you'll be burning to ask questions, and obviously you're welcome to contact me privately as well if you have any questions following this meeting. Okay, the next item on the agenda is item 7, which is the risk management update from Mark Eyre. Again, would you like to present that, please?
Thanks again, Chair. So this is the quarterly risk management update. It's quite a brief paper this time round, and that's largely because we're currently in a state of transition. Risk's shortly going to move away from my service area, the assurance area, into the business intelligence and performance service, and therefore I'm joined this morning by David Bonner, who's the service manager that leads that team. We're anticipating that the new risk officer will be in post early next month. The risk update process is primarily a self-service arrangement, and you'll note from the report we have had a bit of a slip in terms of some of the reviews, which I think is probably largely with the absence of a dedicated risk officer for a period of time. But hopefully we'll look to get that back on track once the new officer has settled in. The only bit I was really going to highlight this time round was that there'd been some discussions at previous meetings about various risks relating to assets and property, health and safety that had been scored as extreme. The majority of these have now been managed down. They're no longer deemed to be extreme as a result of the mitigation that's been established and put in place. So that was all I was going to say in terms of introductions this time around, Chair, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gray.
Morning, Mark. Just a question about the overdue reviews. Is that being driven by the vacancy? And if so, do you have a plan to recover that? Because I see children's services 30-some-odd% overdue. Thanks.
No, thank you for that question. Yeah, I think it is. I think as a result of the fact that sometimes the directors perhaps just need a little bit of a push and shove to remind them to update the risks on a regular basis, which the risk officer is doing. So where we've had that absence for a couple of months, that's what I'd see as being the reason for slippage. Prior to that, it had been quite consistently updated within those timescales.
Are the percentages optimistic, or is there some bias there?
So, I think I don't know. I'm quite comfortable that we'd managed to get to a position where, on a regular basis, all risk owners were updating their risk within those timescales. So I think with a fairly easy and quick reminder, I'd be quite comfortable to say that we'd see a return to the normal percentages.
I think, I'll Councillor Christopher in a minute, I think what we would like to see is obviously embedded, culture that risks are updated regularly without prompting. It just becomes part of the normal process. But also that they're properly updated, not just a sort of arbitrary tick in the box. So that there is some real meaningful updates, particularly on the mitigations, progress. I think that's what we're looking for. We're not here to sort out the actual risk, the cause, but we want to see that the process that we have set up and agreed to is being followed. Councillor Christopher.
Simon Christopher, Dorset Councillor, Marshwood Vale. I note with interest an omission on page 20 where it says adult and housing extreme risks. None. Now, many people in Dorset will look at that and think, housing? No extreme risk? I could talk at length about this. We could all talk about the difficulty of house builders, nitrates, phosphates, etc. I'm reassured, having had a discussion with the head of Yeovil College, that he has 320 construction apprentices, more than engineering. But I am surprised when that is not deemed to be an extreme risk. Lots of people talk to me, not necessarily people who vote for the party that I represent. And I had a person say to me last week, Why does it take so long for my son to get a driving test? And I just suspect that is because there are a lack of examiners. And we are in a county where we appear to have a lack of active workers, and part of that clearly derives because of issues over housing.
I mean, it's interesting comments for what, I mean, I've got some views. Mr. Eyre, you wish to comment?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the question. So what that report is identifying is just purely anything which is currently identified within the extreme risk area, and that's looking at mitigated risks. So anything that's still deemed to be extreme on the basis of the mitigation that's put in place. There are a number, I don't have them in front of me at the moment, but there are a number of housing risks that will fall outside of extreme, I think possibly within the high risk area. I'm happy to provide details on those outside of the committee if that's helpful.
Thank you.
I think, you know, we should look at the framework and what is an extreme risk, which is, you know, a very high probability of occurring, almost certain. It is catastrophic, which implies multiple deaths of employees, inability to function effectively council-wide, will lead to resignation of the chief executive, corporate manslaughter charges, service delivery must be taken over by corporate government, front page news. And I don't think the examples you gave would put us into that category, although they are serious and possibly, I suppose, could lead to a sort of bad publicity, but it wouldn't be in that category, and we shouldn't be putting them just because it's very serious, but it's not in that league, I think would be right. So we've got to be careful how those, and that they are managed in that way in accordance to the rules consistently. Okay. So are there any other questions on the risk management? I think we are there to note. We're all happy, there's no other. We all made judgment on that, which leads us to item 8, which is the swap internal audit activity progress reports. Sally and Angie, would you like to lead on that, please?
Thank you, Chair. Angie Hooper, Principal Auditor, Swap Internal Audit Services. This is the second of our update reports for the 23-24 financial year. The highlights of this report are: we're offering a reasonable interim opinion. We haven't identified any significant corporate risks as part of our work. We have issued 2 limited assurance opinion reports since our last update report, and the long outstanding actions has increased to 13 as at today. Since our last update report, we have issued 2 limited assurance opinions, and the one-page reports for these can be found on pages 7 to 8 of our report. We will follow up the agreed actions using our normal process with our key contacts in directorates. As we have explained as part of the training that was delivered this morning to members, we will soon be updating the rolling plan to a dashboard that is held within our audit case management system, and members of the committee will soon receive introductory emails explaining the login process. With regards to the actions in the response to climate emergency audit, we will continue to keep in contact with the Corporate Director, Transformation, Innovation and Digital and his team, and we will undertake another formal follow-up early in 2024. We will also undertake a further follow-up of premises-related health and safety towards the end of the year, and should be able to report on this in our next update report in January. Moving on to the action tracker, the number of overdue actions has increased to 13 as at today. 6 of these relate to premises-related health and safety, which I've just said we'll be following up shortly, and 5 relate to risk management, and a new risk management and reporting officer is due to start work in early October, so we'll follow up actions with this officer in due course. I think I've come to the end of our report, so Sally and I are happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know Councillor Cocking, my Vice Chair, has got some questions.
Yeah, so I've got, on the debt management, one is how much is outstanding on the debt? How much, because it's quite significant, and we're always going on, this keeps coming back to this committee, so I'd like to know how much is the debt that is outstanding and how we're managing that. But also, is there a tracker on overdue debt by date, like we do with similar trackers on actions? Is there a tracking system so we know how old these debts are? Oh,
I'm looking at perhaps Heather, Aidan Dunn, or Heather, or Sean.
We have Sean.
Sean Creamer, I understand you're on hybrid, yep. Go ahead.
Hi there. Hopefully you can all hear me. So thanks for the question. So as part of reviewing the council's financial management, one of the things that we identified was there's an opportunity to strengthen a number of aspects of financial management, to have that kind of more rounded view of the council's finances. So that includes things like capital, debt monitoring, and also some of our other income generating areas, which we're actively developing a dashboard which is being shared with SLT in draft, and we're just finalising that at the moment. That dashboard covers things such as how old is the debt, who owes the money, what the nature of it is, and so it covers a number of the points that were raised in the chamber. That detail at the moment is planned to be shared with SLT and allows them again to drill into that, and it aims to encourage officers to take a more proactive approach to managing some of the service debt that we have within services. We've also identified that there are some different approaches within services too, in terms of some of the debt is managed under the strategic finance function, so kind of centrally managed, the chasing of that, and then some of the debt is managed by services. So we're also looking at piloting an approach where we've bringing in some additional staff into that central finance team to do some of the debt recovery activity. So I'm pleased to say that we interviewed posts last week and successfully offered to two individuals who will be joining the council week commencing the 9th of October, who are also going to help with that more proactive approach to managing some of our debt, pilot how that works, and then if assuming that's successful, then look to expand that function to take that more proactive approach in managing our debt. So just a quick recap, we do have a dashboard at the moment, which is in development and will be rolled out with the organisation shortly. That complements the data that's already available to officers on a day-to-day basis through access to the financial ledger system as well. And then we've also identified some opportunities to bring in additional capacity to improve our debt chasing and collection activity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Creamer. Does that answer your question?
just what is the level of debt that we are carrying at the moment? And also, would the dashboard be available to members in a slightly different format? Because obviously the finance team would have to have a very in-depth, but would a sort of a similar thing be available to members as well? But also, what is the level of debt that we are carrying that will be on this dashboard?
Yeah, if I can answer that one again. So in terms of the level of debt, it's currently just under 50 million. So I think at Q1 we were on about 47 million. So we're just under 50 million pounds of debt. The majority of this is in relation to adult social care fees. So as people know, it's an expensive area, and some of that is deferred payment arrangements whereby people have deferred the payment of their debt for future. So some of the aged debt is aged, but not necessarily of concern, as that debt will be recovered in the future. In terms of sharing that data with members, we can definitely look into how and when the format of this would be most appropriate to share with members, and it does and will continue to feature as part of the quarterly budget monitoring reports that come through the political cycle as well. So you'll definitely get access to that quarterly, but also we can look at how we can give you more regular access to that data. As you say, a slightly sanitized or refined version of it at a high level.
Thank you. Councillor Gray.
Good morning, Sean. There's only one thing that worried me that you said about the dashboard and monitoring debt. I mean, I raised it maybe 3 or 4 councils ago that the 47 million debt needed to be chased. I wasn't conscious that you were bringing extra resource. So my question is, do you think there's some training needed within the directorates to make debt more important to chase? Because I would have thought that it would have been a key performance indicator for the people that are collecting the money in the first place. Thank you.
So if I come back in, so yeah, we are looking at bringing in the additional staff into that centre and looking at working with services to understand what is the nature of some of the debt that we're incurring and what might be some of the reasons it's perhaps not been chased in services. We're aware that some of the service areas that are seeing the debt build up, there's significant pressures in terms of operational responsibilities and delivery. So sometimes chasing the debt isn't the top of priority list for those officers, hence looking at this centralised function to strengthen the debt collection. But we'll work with officers to understand what some of the barriers are to chasing that at the moment and look to either strengthen that and train officers within services or look at offering more support from the centre to chase that debt as well. Depends on what the specific needs of the service are and service users as well, because some of the so we obviously recognise that it's a very sensitive matter, some really challenging economic circumstances out there for individuals and households across Dorset. So need to take a customer-focused approach to how we recover the debt across different services.
Seeing Councillor Gray nodding, so I think he's taken that on board. I'm not sure he's fully signed up yet, but we'll see, and we look forward to seeing those debts got under control. I think that's something I think this committee will be interested in monitoring. Moving on to the other item, limited assurance. I know you have a question. We've got Mr. Moon, who's, I believe, maybe able to answer this one for you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Moon. Reading about the driver's behaviour, whoops, I've dropped my papers. Some of it is very concerning about poor driver behaviour. It doesn't seem, it's a very informal approach. And 150 drivers, their licences weren't checked. There was a vehicle that was involved in an accident and the footage wasn't there. So we're putting the council at risk from insurance claims. So it just seems to be a lot of inconsistency across the area. So how is that being managed at the moment, and how are we implementing some changes in that so that the council is reassured that these licences are checked and footage is being recorded for the heavier, is it 28-tonne vehicles as well?
Welcome, Mr. Moon.
Head of Waste and Fleet Operations for Dorset Council. To answer your question about the driver's licence checks, for clarity, the driver's licence declaration forms had been completed by the drivers in question. But what we do in the professional drivers in highways and fleet and in waste is we do an automatic 6-monthly check. Those 150 drivers from the coast and countryside area were not included in those, but they had to fill up their individual driver declarations. They have now been added on to the automatic 6-monthly check. Regarding the question about the CCTV, the waste vehicles in particular have various different types of CCTV fitted due to the age of the vehicles. We are moving towards a new remote access CCTV system, but it is unfortunate and something we cannot change. Sometimes we do not know it's not working until we go to download the software, and it's something we cannot change. We do check them every 8 weeks when they go into the workshops. And finally, due to drivers' behaviours, we recently updated the driver at work policy, which clearly states that all drivers must comply with the requirements of the Highway Code. We are having discussions with our colleagues across the council from a fleet compliance that we all deal with them the same way. It is fair to say that in some areas they are more robust with dealing with drivers' behaviours than others, But through John Selgren's Place Performance Board, which this report, a report goes to each month, we are starting to deal with individual departments.
You have some clarification?
Yeah. Just if you're checking the footage every 8, or if they're working every 8 weeks, would it not be sort of to bring that say forward every 4 weeks, just as a precaution if you can't guarantee that they're... I know nothing's foolproof, but would it not be wiser just to check them more often than leave them every 8 weeks?
The larger vehicles with the CCTV go into the workshops every 8 weeks for safety inspection, and that's when we check the CCTV is working at that time.
Okay, I've got Councillor Robin Legg.
Thank you, Chair. Robin Legg, Sherborne Rural. Just some numbers, please, Mr. Boone. When you look at the figure for 150 or thereabouts who weren't checked, what sort of proportion is that in relation to the total? Because what I'm not certain about, we talk about drivers that are regularly checked, but I haven't got the faintest idea about what kind of numbers of people we're talking about. And second question really is a very similar one. How many vehicles do we have in the fleet that weren't really being recorded on this what system which is called Fleet Wave, an IT system which is supposed to flag up when they're due for an MOT or a service? What sort of numbers of vehicles are we talking about there approximately?
So we have approximately 700 vehicles on the council's fleet, and they all are recorded on this FleetWave system. The FleetWave system will identify to the fleet compliance team when they're due to come in for their inspections and their MOTs. And it's true that there was a couple that the software missed. We've now gone back to doing it manually whilst we talk to the FleetWave about the software.
I was going to ask, actually, in relation to that response, you said you've gone back to a manual system. Would it be helpful if you've only got 700 vehicles, would it be beyond the capability really to run it from a manual system rather than an IT system, or is that am I a Luddite in that respect?
The FleetWave system does more than tell the service users when their vehicles are coming in. It will record all the work that's done on there. It enables us to cost out how much it costs to keep these vehicles on the road, which also informs their replacement program. So it is a lot more than just saying you're coming in for your 8-weekly service. So the manual part of that is the actual programming in. We've got 5 workshops, and they all receive vehicles and they're all programmed in. I'll have to apologise. I forgot the first part of the question you asked about the drivers. So.
Really just to get a feel for the number of drivers. I wasn't sure from reading this whether we were talking about almost anybody who drives a vehicle for the local authority and makes a travel claim, or whether it was restricted simply to what you might term commercial driving for the authority, like highways and waste disposal and other practical things of that nature, rather than the wider number of employees of the authority who may occasionally go driving around to look at sites or do things for the authority.
So the system at the moment is every single driver who drives on behalf of the council, whether they drives a council vehicle or their own vehicle, needs to do an annual driver's declaration. What I would term professional drivers, the drivers who drive the council's vehicles, particularly the large goods vehicles which are on the operator's licences, they mandate us to do a 6-monthly check.
You happy with that, Councillor? Yep. Thank you for that very thorough answer. And I think it's something that we, again, will be looking to see those tweaks and improvements. Hopefully that's well in hand. We were asked to note the report, and we've made comment on it. And thank you very much for the update. Members who, I think we were all on the apart from Councillor Legg, I think the training prior to this, we look forward to the new online system, which will give us a better, I think, better dashboard view and make us better informed. So we look forward to that. Thank you very much. Okay, that makes us move on to item 9, which is the Treasury Management Annual Report. Mr. Wilkes, I think, isn't it? David Wilkes.
Thank you, Chairman. David Wilkes, Service Manager for Treasury and Investments at Dorset Council. I don't plan to go through the report in detail, but I'll highlight a few key points and do my best to answer any questions you may have. So the Council follows the SIPFA Treasury Management Code of Practice, and this means that each year we need to produce a Treasury Management Strategy for the forthcoming year, and then a mid-year update and an annual review of activity against that strategy. And this is the final one of those, the annual review of activity for 2022-23. At your next meeting in November, we'll be bringing you the mid-year update for the current financial year. So in the summary, I've picked out a few key metrics for the year. So the Council's capital financing requirement, or CFR, the underlying need to borrow, as at the end of March 2023, was 355 million, compared to 345 million at the start of the year, but also compared to what was estimated in the budget of £368 million. So the borrowing need has increased, but not increased as much as was expected through the year due to slippage in the capital programme. Our total external borrowing and other capital financing liabilities, such as PFI of the Council, at the end of the financial year was 219 million, and the total interest paid servicing the external debt was 6.9 million. The difference between the capital financing requirement and actual borrowing was approximately 136 million, and this was financed temporarily by what's referred to as internal borrowing. So this is when you use your reserves and your working capital that could otherwise have been invested to generate an investment return to offset the need to borrow externally. As at the end of March 2023, the Council held cash and cash equivalents of £41 million, plus other investments valued at £74 million, in total £115 million. And the total interest receivable and investment income on those types of balances through the year was approximately £4.77 million. So just moving on to section 2 of the report, which talks about the external context that Treasury management activities take place in. Treasury management at the Council doesn't take place in a vacuum. It's heavily impacted by what's happening in the wider world. And in section 2 of the report, we summarise some of the key points there, and then there's much more detail in Appendix 1 of this report. The biggest external factors influencing our Treasury management activity last year won't be a surprise, were basically inflation and then the Bank of England's attempts to tackle inflation through a series of interest rate rises through the year. So at the beginning of the financial year, the bank rate or base rate was 0.75%, and by the end of the year had risen to 4.25%. And the main impacts of these external factors for the Council's Treasury management is that inflation is seeing costs going out of the Council higher than what would have been anticipated when we set the budget. More positively, seeing higher returns on the cash investments that we hold, but also increased costs of any new borrowing that we would take out. As well as the external context, we then talk about the local context in section 3, and there are, of course, local factors specific to Dorset Council that impact on our Treasury management activities, as well as these external context factors. And these are summarised in section 3. In table 1, you can see the increase in the capital financing requirement over the year. And as we've mentioned, that this was lower than budgeted due to slippage in the capital programme. Now, the CFR is a key driver for our Treasury management activity because it impacts in terms of how much external borrowing we need to take out and also how much of our reserves can be, if you like, left over to be invested, and how much need to finance the capital financing requirement in the short term. Then in table 2, in this section, you'll see that our borrowing has increased over the year, but also our cash and investments have gone down in value as well. So we've already touched on 2 of the main drivers for this, which is the increase in capital financing requirement over the year, and the other big impact of inflation in terms of costs and therefore money going out of the council. The other main driver for this, which we've not referred to, is in the fall in the cash and investments, is COVID funding, and specifically the timing difference between when the council received government funding to support businesses and local residences and getting that money actually out to those local residents and businesses. So the cash and investment balances at the beginning of last financial year, so April 22, would have included large sums of government funding that had been received into the council, but at that point had not been distributed out to the residents and businesses entitled to receive it. Through the first part of 22-23, those cash amounts were put out into the wider community, and therefore what we see at the end of 22-23 is a fairly sharp drop in terms of the cash and investments that we had. That's all that I wanted to say, Chairman, but happy to try and answer any questions that members may have.
Thank you very much. We've got Councillor Gray first.
Morning, David. I think you might have answered the question, but if I replay what I understand, perhaps you could comment. It's on investments. So 149 million at the end of 22, down to 75 million. That looks like the UK Debt Management Office deposits of 60 million. Is that what you're referring to as the COVID funding or the government funding? That's the first part of the question.
Thank you. We don't specifically put any sums of money in specific investment products. We look at the wider balances and we invest accordingly in a mix of things. So the big drop in terms of the overall balance is driven by the three factors that I've talked about. Specifically in relation to the money that we had in the Debt Management Office, during what I'll call the COVID years, where our cash balances were at very elevated levels I described it as being on steroids, really, our cash balances during that period, and interest rates being negligible, one of the key driver for where we were putting that money was security. And the Debt Management Office is probably the most secure investment opportunity that we have available to us as local councils, local authorities. So the reason for the specific drop in the Debt Management Office investments was as they matured through 22-23, we did not replenish them. So where we did have the spare cash, we invested that in money market funds where we started to see a big increase in the rates of return through the year. As we mentioned, interest rates on short-term investments went up substantially through the year.
Thank you, David. Yeah, it was just sort of where I was leading the question, because the net charge to the revenue account investment over debt, it would be 2.2 million, I think, in the report. So that's what's hit the revenue account. So we paid last year 2.2 million to service debt. So my question was more about, well, I've got one suggestion, which is, given the unusual nature of finances during the COVID period and coming out, I would have liked to have seen more years on some of the tables, so that if you look at it from 22 to 23 and you look at the big drop in investments from 149 to 75, it sort of scares me a little bit. With interest rates going up, which is obviously not good, the only upside is that we get more money or more interest for our money. So my question was leading down the, why aren't we doing more investment when it's actually halved in 1 year? You've given that explanation, but for the reporting, I'd like to see perhaps 3 or 4 years of because of the nature of investments and debt. In the tables, I don't necessarily want any comment, but in the tables, it would be good for context. Thank you.
Just to add to that, I just think that's a sensible suggestion, and we'll take that into consideration in future reports.
Thank you very much. Councillor Legg.
Can I follow up on that train of thought and say, would you like to get a crystal ball out and what would you anticipate, therefore, would be the entries in a column for March of 2024 in terms of both cash or cash equivalents and total investments? Because obviously what David's identified is there's been a huge drop in the value of investments. And I kind of think that what you're saying to us is, well, it's not going to be like that next year.
Well, I'm always very wary when someone starts their question by asking me to get the crystal ball out. Obviously, in November, we'll come back with our mid-year review, which will show what's actually happening this year and where we think we're likely to be by the end of the year. So I think the next meeting we can come back. I can refer to my crystal ball and we can come back with some further information for you. But I suspect that our cash balances will reduce over this year. That would be my expectation. I wouldn't expect it to be as dramatic as last year, but I would expect that some of those factors that we talked about, inflation, clearly that's continued through the 6 months that we've had of this year as well. So that again is putting pressure in terms of the amounts of funds that are going to be available for the council to invest. But I think in November we can come back with more detail on that question.
Could I follow it up by kind of developing an idea, a rather scary idea? It says towards the end of the report, which I think is the Arling Close bit, oops, it's gone away. It refers to Section 114 notices. We've had Birmingham getting into difficulty. And quite clearly, in the past, not very many authorities have actually got into trouble. I was listening to a report on the BBC Radio 4 the other day, which suggested there were like a queue of local authorities probably waiting to get into the situation where they were going to issue 114 notices, maybe as many as 20. I gather, I hope, that we're not in that 20, but where would we be in the kind of pecking order of things? Do you think we're very, very comfortable and we don't need to worry? I mean, obviously the times are very difficult at the moment and financially very constrained. And it's not easy working in local government and trying to deliver services and protect them. But I rather hope that we're a long, long way away from any kind of scary thing happening to us, as has happened to other local authorities. But the suggestion from the BBC was that more authorities are getting into financial difficulty because of the times they're living in.
Thank you for that. I know our Chief Financial Officer would like to comment on that.
Thank you. Good morning. Aidan Dunn, Chief Finance Officer. Absolutely right, Councillor, that Section 114s, which is essentially a notice that the Chief Finance Officer would issue explaining that local authority can no longer set a balanced budget. We have seen more of those in recent months, and I'll comment on that in a second, but to be absolutely clear, we Dorset Council, are nowhere near that position at all. So what we've seen so far with your Sloughs, Wokings, Thurrocks are councils that have borrowed significantly and made significant investments, and those investments have dropped in value and the cost of borrowing has increased, and therefore their borrowing costs are exceptional. And clearly we're not in that position. So those are the ones that we've seen in the early round of Section 114 notices. In recent weeks, we've seen Birmingham City Council, which has got exceptional issue of equal pay claims that, once again, a significant cost to them that's unusual in the sector. And once again, Dorset Council isn't part of that, hasn't got an equal pay claim to that extent either. So we're not under threat regarding those two factors. I think the BBC's reporting 20 or so local authorities at risk. I'm hearing the same, and I know a number of other local authorities are struggling. despite the not having the investments and not having the equal pay claim, it's a difficult time. Costs are going up for local authorities, just as they are for our residents. So it's a difficult time to balance the books. But here at Dorset Council, we're prudently financially managed, as you're seeing in the papers. We do have reserves at a top end of what's required. But it does mean that as we set the budget for next year and future years, we do have to be very cautious and potentially take some really difficult decisions. But I'm confident that Dorset Council is well financially managed, well governed, and at this stage we've got no risk of Section 114 notice.
Thank you for that assurance. Councillor Gray.
Another question for David, actually. A bit of schooling, really. Is there a reason under Table 11 that 70% of our borrowing is 25 years and over as a maturity? What strikes me about the table is that it's not very even. So, dare I say, using a political term, kicking the can down the road, are we loading 25 years and over with 70% of 199 million, is how I read it, rather than spreading the debt over? And I know they are fixed terms, but is there a financial reason why we don't have any debt 2 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, 10 to 15 years? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. The majority of that, in fact, all of that long-term debt that you see there, other than what's due under 12 months, is borrowing that was effectively inherited by Dorset Council from the predecessor council, so primarily from Dorset County Council, but also a small amount of borrowing from Weymouth and Portland Borough Council as well, I think. So, and a number of those decisions were made. I was at Dorset County Council, but actually all of that longer term borrowing was actually put in place some years before I joined as well. So I hope that doesn't sound too slopey-shouldered. It's a very good point, though, and it is something that we are going to be looking at quite closely this year, because you're right to point out that there are some gaps in there where there's no borrowing maturing, and this is Table 11, the maturity structure of the borrowing. So we're using this kind of analysis and some more detailed analysis year by year to try and target any new borrowing that we do take out that isn't short-term, that we try and find a space where there's no debt already maturing. So, yes, yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm not seeing any other questions up at the moment. Councillor Legg referred to crystal balls. I do remember a presentation right at the beginning of this council for audit and governance where the expert who came on to give us a Treasury presentation said he didn't think that interest rates would be above 1% in the next 10 years. So I'll take anything with a pinch of salt. And in fact, looking at the percentage rates, we all think, oh, paying 4.1% or something, that's terrible, you know. And now it's that's not too bad now, is it? So things move, as we know, events happen beyond our control. I've got a question on Table 1, page 36, around long-term PFI liabilities. And I'm assuming that's the street lighting in Colfox School. I think that's the only PFIs we have. Evan Appin's head's nodding there. I'm puzzled why we budgeted for 25 million when the actual spend was 21. You know, that's a 20% uplift, although we've actually spent under that. So I'm just wondering for some explanation around that. Maybe that's too detailed here, and that's something that you need to come back. Apologies for that spirit. I've only just noticed it myself.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think if it's okay, we'll take that away and come back to you with a response on that. I'm afraid I don't know the answer off the top of my head on that one.
That's fine. I appreciate that. It sprung you on that one. Just to notice it, I thought it's a bit odd there. I know that PFIs have rather onerous clauses, and it may be linked with inflation or whatever, and we've realised savings or something like that. But I think we'll come back with an answer. That would be great. So an extensive report there, and update. I think it's been really useful, and some good challenges there. So I think we note and comment again on that. Thank you very much. We now move to the final item on the agenda, which is just the work programme, the update of our business, what we've got planned for November, which is, again, for note, really. Are there any questions or any things that we think we should have on there that we haven't? Looking around the room. No, Councillor Gray.
Given what we heard today, can I ask that we add a debt management, whatever the new debt management process is, as a specific item for once it's been through SLT and Cabinet, that it comes here for us to look at, please?
I think that sounds reasonable. Is that something that officers would be happy to do? Yeah. Aidan Dunn's nodding his head, so that's the go then. Thank you very much. In that case, we note that, and I thank you very much for your attendance. And hopefully next meeting we'll have our co-opted members asking even more challenging questions and provoking questions, no doubt, from ourselves. But thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you.